Most Buddhists would say that there is no soul, because the Buddha taught that there is no permanent self. There is no fixed you that owns your experience or that carries on without changing. But at the same time, Buddhism teaches rebirth. So if there is no self, then what is it exactly that is reborn? And when you go looking for an answer, you find that in two other major traditions, they seem to be circling the same puzzle. In Advaita Vedanta, they ask it as, what is the difference between jiva, the individual personal soul, and Atman, the underlying deeper self that is behind all of it? And in Christianity, they ask it as, what is the difference between soul and spirit? So we have three traditions here: Christianity, Advaita Vedanta, Buddhism, all with different vocabulary, but maybe the same underlying answer. Let's start with Buddhism and the question of, if there is no fixed permanent self, then what exactly is reborn? Well, the traditional answer uses the image of a flame. And if you have two candles, one that's lit and the other isn't, and you pass the flame from one candle to another, then the new flame isn't the same as the first flame, but is not completely unrelated either. The second flame exists because of the first one, and it is continuous with it. That's roughly how Buddhism describes the passing on from one life to the next. A stream of cause and effect, the passing on of habits and tendencies, and the residue of craving and aversion, without any fixed self actually passing on from one to the other. This kind of breaks the assumption that there is either a soul or there is nothing at all, because in Buddhism there's almost something in between, where there's something real enough to pass on tendencies and habits, but there's no fixed permanent self. Advaita Vedanta gives us more precise language for this puzzle, because it talks about the jiva, which is you. It is your story, your history, your personality. It is what is born and grows old and falls in love and dies. And then there is Atman, the deeper self beneath the jiva. It is identical with Brahman. It is the underlying ground of reality itself. So what's the relationship between jiva and Atman? Well, the most common analogy that gets used is the wave and the ocean. Jiva is the wave, and Atman is the ocean. So let's think about Christianity. In the Bible, Paul, writing in Greek, often used two Greek words, which, when translated to English, were often flattened into one term, the soul. The two words that he used were pneuma and psyche. Psyche is closer to what we would call personality, mind, will, or personal identity. The part of you that thinks and decides and remembers and feels like you personally. Pneuma, or spirit, is something deeper. Paul writes about a spirit that moves through all of us, through all people, through all creation. When he writes, "It is no longer I who live, but Christ who lives in me," he is talking about something that is remarkably similar to what we explored in Advaita Vedanta and in Buddhism. The sense that the personal self isn't the deepest layer, that there is something underneath that, something more fundamental. Soul is the jiva, or is the wave, and spirit is the Atman, or the ocean. The same underlying shape keeps showing up. So where does that leave us? Buddhism says there is no soul, and Christianity and Advaita Vedanta say that there is a psyche or a jiva, an individual something real enough to be named. And that looks like a straightforward contradiction, doesn't it? But I think that the contradiction might actually start to go away when you see that all three traditions could be pointing to the same three layers. Let me show you what I mean. So on the outside, we have the ego, the conditioned self, the reactive self that's built from habit and story. In the New Testament, in the Bible, Paul calls this the old self, and it's what Vedanta calls ahamkara. And then underneath that, we have the soul, temporary but real enough to name according to Christianity and to Advaita Vedanta. because in Advaita Vedanta they'll call it the jiva, and in Christianity, in the original Greek, they would call that the psyche. So this is the layer that Christianity and Vedanta are both willing to call a soul, but in Buddhism they don't put that word to it. But there is something at this layer. So there is the bundle of tendency and habits, the karma that gets passed on from life to life. And this is like the flame passed from the candle to another candle. Then at the center, we have the ultimate. This is the spirit. It could be called the Brahman, which is identical with the Atman, and every individual soul is temporarily shaped out of this. So Christianity and Vedanta both give that center a name, the Atman or the Brahman and the spirit. This is something that you can point to and say, this is underneath everything else. The Buddha didn't do this. The Buddha didn't give a name to ultimate reality. But saying that, later schools of Buddhism did give a name to that. So it could possibly be aligned with the concept of Dharmakaya in Mahayana Buddhism, which is said to be the unmanifested, inconceivable aspect of a Buddha, out of which the Buddha arises and to which they return after their dissolution. And there's another term as well in Buddhism, this time from Dzogchen, which is Rigpa, the luminous awareness that is not born and does not die. Now, there is a very good reason that the Buddha didn't give a name to ultimate reality, and even denied the existence of a soul, and said that the ego was an illusion. All of these things come down to the fact that if you start naming something and identifying with something, whether it is the ego or the soul or the ultimate reality, then your ego has something to cling on to, and it's just feeding that first layer. As soon as you say, I am Atman, or I am Brahman, or as soon as you say, Christ lives within me, then it gives the ego something to build this identity on. And then it takes us further away from the truth of reality. Because essentially what we are talking about here is ineffable. So words will never do it justice. And words can act as a pointer. But what the Buddha saw was the risk that those pointers can become something that we build the ego on. That is exactly what is meant when we talk about the finger pointing at the moon becoming more important than the moon itself. That's what we want to avoid happening. We don't want to become attached to these labels and these concepts, because ultimate reality is fundamentally beyond all of that. So maybe the three traditions, Buddhism and Christianity and Advaita Vedanta, aren't actually disagreeing at all. It's just that Advaita Vedanta and Christianity are giving a name to the ultimate, Atman or Brahman and spirit, whereas Buddhism is avoiding giving a name to it. When you give a name to it, that can be useful when they are seen as pointers, as long as you don't mistake the pointers for the actual thing itself. Buddhism refuses to name it, and that might be the safest way to not give the ego something to cling on to. If you want to hear more about how the ideas of self and non-self might actually be pointing towards the same thing, then watch this video next.